I am doing this video out of spite and nothing else.
Hi, says the girl with the right eyes that pairs pretty well when she hits you with the soft smile.
Hi friends, it's Rory, and today is a refilming of a video that I've already done once again. I already filmed this video and then I put it in my editing software and I looked like an 80-year-old woman. I don't know what the heck happened. I just looked awful. And so we're refilming it. That's what today is. Hi, how are you? First of all, peep my earrings, super cute. Love them. And they have something to do with today's topic, which is probably really old at this point, but it was less old when I originally filmed this. And that is, I'm literally going to title this video, Fanfiction is Good, You're Just Pretentious. Is about the absolutely rancid take that was on Twitter a couple of days ago. I will, to the side, put a couple of screenshots of the original thread. Also, first of all, don't send any hate to this person, even though I think that their take is awful and that they should feel bad for making it. I don't want anyone to get any hate, plus this is old tea, so it doesn't even really matter anyways. So basically I'm just gonna go point by point. Before I start though, I do want to say I myself am not a writer, at least a fiction writer. I don't write my own books, so this is coming from someone who is not a writer, but I am a consumer of fanfiction and I've written my fair share of fanfiction. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna talk about my points, and I'm sure it's gonna be less entertaining than the original video was, but yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, I just want to say what an unbelievably awful take this is. This is just a dumb take. And one thing is that I saw while this was happening, a lot of people that were like, you know, we keep having this conversation, you know, if you just ignored people with this take, this type of drama wouldn't happen as much. And I agreed to an extent. Like, there's no need for us to be rehashing old takes again and again. But at the same time, the way that this take was presented just felt extremely dismissive and rude to certain types of people, and I'm gonna go into that more on later. So I think that, you know, people calling this person out and you know, giving their opinions was very valid in this case. The first talking point I would like to bring up, which is writing fanfiction makes you a bad writer. All around, no, bad take, and honestly just wrong in general, like just factually incorrect. And the reason for that is because fanfiction is a great way for people to practice, for people to get the fundamentals of, you know, writing. If they would like to continue, it's a great way for them to, you know, kind of like learn the easy parts of writing. But along with that, fanfiction writing, at least good fanfiction writing, involves knowing a character a lot. Fanfiction writing is a great way to just learn about characters really, really in-depthly. That's not a hot take. It's a point that, you know, several authors have made about this situation, but it is something that needs to be said, you know, especially if you're a character-based reader like me. Characters are kind of like what I go into looking for most. Fanfiction authors, you know, understand that they really want to get into the characters. Writers who start off reading or writing fanfiction, I've noticed a lot of times have like some of the best characters in my opinion. For example, Aiden Thomas. Aiden was very much on Twitter talking about how this was a bad take and talking about how they you know, wrote fanfiction before they were an author, and how some of their books that are coming up could in fact be included as fanfiction. Like Aiden's next book is a Peter Pan retelling, which is essentially Peter Pan, you know, fanfiction. And his characters in Cemetery Boys are was one of my favorite parts about it. Like, I would actually die for Julian Diaz. And speaking of Aiden, once again, a lot of writers start out as fanfiction writers. In fact, there were a whole bunch of authors who came out and were very against this take and was like, you're incorrect, like, you know, this is awful, you know, I wrote fanfiction, here's what I used to write, yada yada yada. People like Aiden Thomas, Kay Ankrum, Meg Cabot used to write fanfiction, and she was, you know, the author of my childhood. Neil Gaiman writes fanfiction, and in fact, he writes fanfiction and publishes it. Like, some of his published books are legitimately just like Sherlock Holmes fan fictions. There's a really good video essay that Lindsay Ellis and I cannot off the top of my head remember who did it because it's been a while since I've watched it. I'll put the name on the screen of the other person, and I'll link the video essay in the description box, but it's really, really good, talking about kind of like the pros and cons and like a defense of fan fiction. It's really good. I highly recommend it. Speaking of, Lindsay Ellis, also an author, also wrote fan fiction. She's been very open about writing Phantom of the Opera fan fiction. Furthermore, taking out the, you know, fan fiction writers are bad writers thing out of like the book world, there are some fan fictions that are better than books. I know I've mentioned my favorite fan fiction of all time on here a couple of times. It is a Hobbit fan fiction called To Change the Course of the Future. It's basically a retelling of the Lord of the Rings, but directly after what happens in The Hobbit. So Bilbo is kicked out of Erebor for, you know, giving away the Arkenstone, and finds out in that time that he has the One Ring and decides to get rid of it. And it is one of the most beautifully written stories that I have ever read. I swear to God, if I could have a printed and bound with a beautiful cover version of that fan fiction, it would be my most prized possession. I love this fan fiction so much. I read it like once a year, and it is a extremely long story, so that's saying something. And like there's a ship that I ship in the Hobbit / Lord of the Rings fandom that comes specifically from that. Like, it doesn't really make sense outside of the story, but within the context of that fan fiction, it is wonderfully written, so cute, so well-rounded, everything makes sense, and as a result, I ship them outside of it. How is that not great writing? Like, I like this fan fiction more than I like the Lord of the Rings movies. And of course, more than I like the Lord of the Rings books, because I've never read the Lord of the Rings books, because as everyone who watches me knows, I do not like fantasy. But I like this fan fiction. Once again, bringing back to characters, fan fiction writers have to know their characters specifically. Gimli is a character in this fan fiction. The Gimli in this fan fiction is 70 years younger than the Gimli in Lord of the Rings, but they are the same character. I'm telling you, there are parts of it that are just like, you nailed this character. You got it 100%. There's a part, they're going to go get the Army of the Dead from the second movie. It's him, and then Dwalin and Thorin go along, and, you know, Gimli is talking to Dwalin and is just like, you know, you go in first, and Thorin's like, wow, I didn't think that he would, you know, be scared of like these, you know, ghost warriors. And then Gimli's just like, yeah, so that then when they stop laughing and I go in, they'll actually be threatened. And I'm like, that is 100% him. That is the most in-character thing that I've ever seen. You understood that about his character. Fan fiction. Anyways, so that's basically, you know, my whole, you know, fan fiction writing is worse argument, because it's not. The second point that I'd like to bring up comes from this reply to someone. I'm gonna put it on the screen, but I'm also gonna read it off. It encourages writing that is more formulaic, playing to tropes, slotting tidily into categories. This annoys me, because if you're looking at fan fiction writing makes you more likely to write tropes, everything is a trope, this argument doesn't really make sense to me, because it's basically saying, you know, you're basically writing the same thing over and over again. But that's a lot of books. Like, everything is a trope. Everything could kind of be seen as fan fiction. So, like, for example, Shakespeare's, historical plays are just fan fiction of real life events. Like, Hamlet is literally English fan fiction. Once again, everything is tropes, and that's because tropes are basically patterns. And what makes, tropes interesting is not the trope itself. It's how that, it's kind of like turned on its head. Like, it's about the journey. It's not about the trope. So I could read the same trope over and over. I have read the same trope over and over. Found family, my favorite trope of all time. Absolutely 100% adore it. It's not so much about the found family itself, it's about how these people come to be a found family. Basically saying, fan fiction writing makes you fall more reliant on tropes is kind of like a non sequitur, because everything is tropes. And furthermore, even if it did fall onto tropes, that's fine, because I'm more interested in what the tropes, how they're used to make a better story. And once again, everything is tropes. The Bible is basically a chosen one retelling. All of your old classic books that everyone loves are basically Bible retellings. But now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of what my real issue with this whole take is. And that is what I'm gonna call fan fiction's relationship to queerness. And this is what the person had to say. Here's why it annoys me. So she talks about how fan fiction is unnecessary because actual queer content is being made and people should just use that instead. My biggest point against this is closeted kids can't always access that. I was raised in a Southern, deeply conservative, religious family, and so I didn't have access to that type of things. I didn't read my first queer book until I was 18. I, didn't have access to queer media outside of fan fiction until I was in college. Along with that, since I was raised in the South, I didn't have access to that type of things. They weren't available to me in my library. They weren't available to me in my school. I would have to have specifically gone out and ordered those types of books myself, to which once again my family would have seen me order them. But you know what I did do? I read fan fiction. I had fan fiction. Literally, my first fan fiction I ever read was a queer fruits basket fan fiction, because that's what I was into in middle school. Cannot believe that it's still the year of our Lord 2021 and I'm reading fruits basket fan fiction. But anyways, not everyone has access to those types of things because of their situation. It's just not something that's safe. But because of the way fan fiction is, because it is mainly on the internet, and once you are of a certain age, you can, hide that type of things by using incognito browsers, by reading mainly on your phone, and then just clearing the browsing history. It's very easy to hide reading queer fan fiction, but not easy to hide reading queer content. And that is something that you have to worry about when you are in a, situation where accessing that content may not be easy or may in fact be very dangerous. Basically saying don't read fan fiction, there's other queer things that you can see, is not valid for those people. Sometimes fan fiction is the only thing that we have. Along with that, let's just talk about that queer content that you're talking about. You're right, queer content is being made and it's absolutely wonderful, and I'm so happy that it is. But when it comes to mainstream, it is always going to be about money. We live in a capitalist society, everyone knows that. And so great queer fiction is being created 100%, but it is going to be stories that publishers think are going to sell the best. 100%, we all know that. Outside of that, there is self-publishing that is absolutely 100% valid, but that doesn't get spread as far because it doesn't have the type of advertising that mainstream publishing has. And that's not me knocking against like self-publishing or knocking against the books that are being, you know, published by mainstream media, because I love them both. Sometimes stories don't get told because of that. A story could not be published because people don't think that it's a story that, you know, is worth being told, but I guarantee that if it's a good fan fiction, it would get read, but it would still be able to be there because fan fiction is not dictated by, you know, what's going to sell the best, because it's free. It's 100% accessible, which is something that I didn't even think about. You know, queer content, yes, it's great 100% to support, you know, queer content being made, read queer books, but some people may not be able to like monetarily support it. And if you, once again, live in a small, you know, Christian southern town, it's not going to be available for you. And you may not be able to afford it. Fan fiction is 100% free. Another thing, up until recently, queer books haven't been as big as they are. We're going through a boom and I'm absolutely 100% happy with it. Of course I am. Most of the books that I read are queer, but I can still to this day remember every single queer book that I've ever read, because for a while it would be like maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 4 books coming out a year in the mainstream. But now there are so many that like I can pick and choose which ones I want. Like I can be like, oh cool, that's a queer book, I'm not really interested in that one, I don't gotta read it, and not be like, well, I've just cut off a quarter of, you know, the queer media that's coming out this year. We have more options now, but for a while we didn't. But fan fiction, a large majority of it is queer, and it's because queer people didn't have, you know, their stories being told, and so they would write them themselves using characters that were already created. This next point is going to be very niche because like a lot of people may have skipped over this point entirely, but it really sticks with me specifically, and I hate this point. Queer kids shouldn't learn what it means to be queer by reading recycled Disney IP. This specifically feels like it is cutting out queer history from those fandoms. It's just incorrect. There's queer history in straight media. Broadway musicals 100% are kind of made for straight audiences. Like, until very recently now we have more queer, you know, Broadway's being made. That's great, we love to see it. But a lot of the people who made Broadway music were queer in some way. Like, it's a stereotype that, you know, musical theater is for gay people, and a lot of that comes from the history of the music being written by gay men, specifically with the Disney IP. I would like to talk about Howard Ashman. Hi, I'm a huge fan of Howard Ashman. He's one of my biggest role models. I absolutely love his music. Hi, if you don't know who Howard Ashman is, he was a lyricist, musical theater writer, you know, director, producer. He wrote the lyrics for Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, and some of the songs from Aladdin. Outside of Disney, he also did Little Shop of Horrors, the movie. He was a big name. He was also a gay man who died of the AIDS epidemic before Beauty and the Beast could even be shown in theaters. Like, they showed the first preview a couple days before he died and went to his hospital room to tell him about how people loved it. If you would like to know more, I highly recommend watching the documentary Howard on Disney Plus if you have it. If you do not have Disney Plus, you can also watch a couple of videos by a awesome video essayist named Dream Sounds here on YouTube, who is one of my favorite YouTubers. I will link a couple of their videos on Howard Ashman specifically because there are several. Howard Ashman is one of my favorites. He's like a big inspiration for me. Because of his role in those movies now become part of queer history. So saying, you know, shouldn't learn what it means to be queer by reading recycled Disney IP is taking out the queer history that is in Disney. Along with that, inside of Disney is a lot of queer themes. Queer kids, myself, people all over talk about how, you know, they kind of see themselves in Disney. I saw myself in Belle because she, you know, was a girl who liked to read and she felt like she didn't fit in and she just wanted more than being stuck in her town. You know, that's how I felt, being stuck in my town, you know, a lesbian even though I thought I was straight. Queer people can see themselves in stories that are about straight people, and we have the right to be able to use those stories to create our own interpretations of them. Along with that, fanfictions can explore, you know, queer content or queer stories that were either underutilized or completely ignored because of people being cowards or, you know, censored. Elsa could be a lesbian, or she could be ace because currently she doesn't have a man, and that's 100% valid. I personally see Elsa as a lesbian. You know, if they didn't want to make Elsa be a lesbian, they need to stop giving her lesbian power ballads, because, like, I'm just saying Show Yourself made me cry because, like, it honestly felt like a queer anthem, you know? Let It Go, despite how annoying it can be, feels queer. Another example, still in Disney, is Poe and Finn from Star Wars. They should have been together. The actors think it, you know. Within Star Wars fanfiction, I'm pretty sure they're still the #1 couple being written about. Their chemistry, their story, it could have been great, but Disney is fucking cowards. And so instead they were censored. After the first movie, they didn't interact as much, you know. They gave Finn Rose, which, don't get me wrong, I fucking love Finn and Rose, and I love Finn and Rey too, but, like, Finn and Poe should have been together, and everyone knows it. And if Star Wars hadn't been cowards, the only queer representation they gave us was a 2-second lesbian kiss that could very easily be taken out of overseas, you know, narratives. Fanfiction allows us to explore what that relationship could have been, what it could have been. And moreover, for the, you know, fanfiction erases queer, you know, history type angle that this person is going for, fanfiction is queer history. I mentioned this on Twitter, you know, about a week ago, and I thought about it because I saw it on a TikTok where someone was talking about Spock and Kirk and how they didn't care what, you know, old boomer Star Trek fans, you know, had to say that they were basically married, which is 100% true. Spock and Kirk are married. And I tweeted about how it seemed unfair to the women of the Star Trek fandom who wrote fan fiction, hand-printed and hand-distributed zines, who basically started conventions, how it felt, you know, unfair to their memory to be like, we don't care about you, they're together, because, like, not to quote a TikTok sound, but the time is now, bitch. And it's like, you're too late, the war's already started. Like, they were already here. Modern day fandom is basically thanks to, you know, those women who, you know, were the first Star Trek Spurk fans, and a lot of them were queer. A lot of them were queer women. Fanfiction is queer history, and saying that, you know, queer kids shouldn't learn about being queer by reading fanfiction is essentially spitting in the queer history that fanfiction comes from. Overall, it just kind of feels dismissive to the people that fanfiction is kind of for. Like, I know that, you know, straight men can read fanfiction, but they're very much in the minority. The people I see reading and writing and consuming fanfiction are mainly queer, people of color, and women. Less likely to have their stories told. They have been less likely to kind of be their own writers, because for a long time it was just straight cis white men. And, like, nothing from the original thread says anything about this, but it just feels like, once again, people are hating on something that a large portion of teenage girls enjoy, because no one can let teenage girls like things. I don't think there is anything that teenage girls like that will not be mocked and ridiculed. This one just so happens to also kind of mock and ridicule other types of people. Anyways, the overall message for this is your take is bad. You should feel bad for saying it. Stop being so fucking pretentious. And with that, let me go ahead and give you the fanfiction of the week. I am going to be giving you a Star Trek fanfiction today. Just so you know, it is for the original or alternative original series. So the Chris Pines movies, those are the only Star Trek movies I've seen. I am sorry to the original Star Trek fans. I 100% support you. I love everything that you've done. You have created history. I just cannot watch them because I've tried and I just can't get into them. So the fanfiction of the day is called Like Blood, the Stars. It's by Star Treks. It is kind of a retelling of the movie where Jim Kirk has a Vulcan daughter who he adopted after the event of Tarsus 4. I believe I pronounced that right. I looked it up. It's great. 100% love it. Read it several weeks ago. Other than that, as always, there is a link down below to where you can register to vote, look at different social movements going on throughout the world, find ways to help make your world a better place. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Bye!
They don't wanna talk, they don't wanna feel the voice in my head saying I don't think I'm. They don't wanna talk, they don't wanna feel the voice in my head saying I don't think I'm real, 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 I don't think I'm. I don't know where my head's been at.